The card Counterspell is probably one of the most iconic cards in all of Magic's history, but yet, at the Commander tables, I don't see it being played that often. Is it because of the fact that it's completely outclassed by all the other variations, or is it just overlooked? Let's take a look and find out. What's up, everybody? My name's Matt and you're watching Top Commander. So today's video is about the card Counterspell because I don't see it played at Commander tables very often. I see a lot of the different variations over Counterspell a lot of the times. And it's one of those things that you kind of start questioning, is Counterspell still a good card? Or is there a reason that people are playing the other variations instead? So I'm going to go in depth a little bit on about 10 or so of the other counterspells that I see played more often than straight up Counterspell. And this question also raises the factor of, well, more or less it erases the factor of budget. So some of these counterspells I'm going to talk about are a little bit on the more expensive side, but bear with me and you'll see where I'm going with this. So when it comes to Commander, counterspells can make or break a game a lot of the times. If your opponent's going to go for a win, you can counterspell something in the combo and stop them from winning. Or if you're about to go off and win the game, a counterspell can help you make sure that your win con goes off, for the most part. Now, when it comes to counterspells in Magic, we are going on almost 30 years of Magic at this point. Over 20,000 cards have been created. There have been so many different versions of Counterspell that it makes you wonder, is Counterspell still a good card, right? But if you look at all the other variations, yes, there's some upside on some of these, and there's some downside on some of these as well. So let's go ahead and start off with Counterspell, which is the granddaddy of all counterspells, basically. For 2 blue, it's an instant that simply says counter target spell. That's it. That's all she wrote. 2 blue mana, and it's gone. Whatever it was is not hitting the table. Now, that would seem really good. And it's the only counterspell that can do that for just 2 mana to just straight up counter anything in the game. Now, minus the fact that there are cards that say that they can't be countered, there's different counterspells that do that as well, that they can't be countered. But when you look at that exchange rate, 2 mana to spend 1 card to stop anything in the game seems really good, but what are the ones that are being played more often? Now again, some of these are more expensive, so we're going to ignore the fact of budget, which, starting off, we'll go ahead with the more expensive one, which is Force of Will. Force of Will is 3 generic and 2 blue for an instant that says counter target spell. But it also has another line of text saying that you can pay 1 life and exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay Force of Will's mana cost. So essentially a free counterspell. It's not costing you any mana. Is this better than regular counterspell? If you can get it off for free, pay everything, if you're paying the cost to cast it for free, in a way, yes, it is better than Counterspell because you don't have to have the mana for it. And your opponent won't expect it. It doesn't typically expect a Counterspell when you're tapped out. So this is one of the few cards that you can automatically say, hey, this is a little bit better than Counterspell. Under certain conditions is the key point of this. Now, going on with Force of Will, there is another one which was printed in Modern Masters, I believe was the name of that set. Force of Negation is 1 generic and 2 blue for an instant. It says counter target non-creature spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. The other line of text: if it's not your turn, you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. Now, is this card better than Counterspell itself? On the concept of if it's not your turn and you're using the ability to cast it for free, it's a free cast Counterspell, so yes. But at the same time, no, because it will only counter non-creature spells. Therefore, Counterspell is still better in that instance. And the fact that Force of Negation, when it counters it, it doesn't send the card to the graveyard. Counterspell does. It exiles the card. So, again, is this better than just straight up Counterspell? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I feel like a lot of people just like Force of Negation and Force of Will for the fact that it's a counterspell that you can cast for free. You don't have to hold up any mana. And that's also part of the reason why these cards are as expensive as they are. Not to mention they're also played in other formats that take advantage of these cast for free counterspells. Another one that falls into the same category, this one is way more budget than Force of Will, but because it's also a common, didn't realize that at first. It's foil, so 2 generic and 2 blue for an instant that says counter target spell. Now, the part where you can cast this card for free is you can discard an island and another card rather than pay the spell's converted mana cost. Okay, so this one you have to be able to pitch a land, an island in particular, and discard any other card. It doesn't have to be a blue card. So is this one better than Counterspell? In some circumstances, sure, is a free spell. If you can't cast it for free, though, it's costing you 4 mana to do the same thing that Counterspell does for 2. So, again, I feel like this would be a card that more people are okay with for the fact that it's casting for free. And in Commander, if you cast something for free, you didn't spend mana on it, you're gaining advantage. That's card advantage by having stuff come in for free. Now, this whole segment kind of came up for me in the fact that when Commander 20 came out, one of the precons there was a series of cards that came out that say that you can cast them for free as long as you have a commander on the table. And of course the blue one was a counterspell. Fierce Guardianship is 2 generic and a blue for an instant. Counter target non-creature spell. If you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost. Again, this is free casting. And very easily done free casting, in my opinion, especially in Commander. If you have a deck that has a very low-cost commander out on the field, Fierce Guardianship is very easily just a free counterspell in your deck. But now, so these first 4 cards, these are just cards that you can cast for free. These are ones that I see very often. But a lot of this also depends on what kind of deck you're playing, how many colors is your deck. Some decks can't manage 2 blue. A 5-color deck, it's harder to get 2 blue on the field unless you're blue focused and your mana curve is focused more on blue. So, a lot of these are... The fact that you can cast these for free, you don't have to adjust your mana quite as much. But these are cards that, are they better than Counterspell? In their own right, yes, for the fact that you can cast them for free. But they don't just stop everything. Most of these are only stopping non-creature spells. Now, granted, in Commander, a lot of the combos that you see people win with is because of a piece of the combo that is not a creature. If you look at most of the combos, there's not that many creature combos that don't rely on a non-creature. And even some of the ones that do, if somebody plays a Tooth and Nail to go get 2 creatures that can give them the automatic win, like Chaos and Triskelion, it's an infinite combo right there. But they have to if they're relying on Tooth and Nail to get those cards on the field. Fierce Guardianship, Force of Negation can get rid of that spell for you and buy you some time. So, a lot of these are... I feel like a lot of these are the fact that the value that you get from it. 2 mana to just counter a spell just isn't enough sometimes for most Commander players, because Commander players like value. Casting a counter spell for free is value. So you don't spend mana, you're just casting the spell for free to stop something. That is pure value. Another one that gets used a lot more often that I see is Dovin's Veto, which was the one from War of the Spark, if I'm remembering correctly. It's blue and a white for an instant that says this spell cannot be countered, and counter target non-creature spell. Okay, so this one you have to be in blue and white, which a lot of decks that run counter spells kind of is in blue and white anyways, unless they're in blue-black. But again, if you're in the colors for Dovin's Veto, do you still run counterspell? When you've got the free cast options and you have Dovin's Veto as a option as well, this is a counterspell that can't be countered. That's value on its own. Yes, you have to pay the 2 mana. But in the fact that it does something other than just counter a spell, it can't be countered itself. That's more value to a Commander player. So these are all cards that you just gotta look at like, okay, how much value is a Commander player getting off of these counter spells? Commander players love value. A counterspell that has additional value than just counter a spell is more than likely going to be used. Another one that can be seen the same way, Disallow. Disallow is 1 generic and 2 blue. It is counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. So this one card can answer way more things than you can pretty much think of. If they cast something, counter it. If they go to activate an ability, now it does say mana abilities cannot be targeted. So if somebody uses the ability of like a Gilded Lotus, you can't counter the activated ability. But now if somebody's using a commander like Thrasios, Thrasios is not a mana ability, but he has an activated ability. Or if they use something like Throne of the God Pharaoh, which at the end of the turn has a triggered ability that says each opponent loses life equal to the amount of tapped creatures you control at the end of your turn. You can disallow that trigger because it's a triggered ability. Or somebody goes to, I don't know why you would want to do this, but let's say somebody casts a Kozilek, the Butcher of Truth. He has a cast trigger on him that says that you can draw 4 cards. He's also a 12/12 Annihilator 4 when he hits the field. Now, I don't know why you would want to do this, but you could use Disallow to counter the trigger to stop them from drawing 4 cards. But then they still have a 12/12. So in that instance, would you just counter the spell? That's a little game theory question that... Let me know what you guys think down below. Leave a comment on that one in that particular case and tell me what you guys would do, because that's kind of actually a funny one to think about. Do you let them draw the 4 cards, or do you let them keep the 12/12 and just hopefully you have a removal spell to get rid of it? I want to know what people want, how people respond to this one. So let me know down in the comments below what you guys think. So, Disallow covers 3 different things. That's great. Another one that I see used more often than Counterspell is Spell Swindle. This one is 3 generic and 2 blue. No, there is no free casting this card. Counter target spell, create X colorless treasure artifact tokens where X is that spell's converted mana cost. They have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Okay, so this one I personally use in a Brutaclad deck because it's a counterspell that does what I want the deck to do, which is create tokens to be able to make bigger tokens to overwhelm my opponents. So this card has its uses and its additional value, or you could just use it to just get more mana. But it's a 5 mana counterspell. Is that really difficult to do in Commander, though? A lot of what we do in Commander is ramp for the first few turns so we can get to like 10 mana on turn 6. People are hard casting Blightsteel Colossus on turn 4 in this format. Like, it's possible. We run decks that are 100 card singleton for a reason. We have the time and we have the ability to ramp up and do the big splashy plays. That's what 90% of Commander is. I want to throw out a Blightsteel Colossus. I want to throw out the Eldrazi. I want to Villainous Well somebody for 20. Like, that's what we do in Commander. So ramp is not an issue. So the fact that this card costs 5 mana is not that big of a deal. And the fact that this card is also giving you more mana. This is all stuff that Commander players look at. That's the thing that most people are missing about counterspells versus the actual card Counterspell. Another one that I see played a lot is actually Swan Song. Now this one's interesting. For the fact that it's for 1 blue, you can counter target enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Now that does not cover creatures or artifacts or planeswalkers. Can't stop any of those. Its controller then creates a 2/2 bird with flying. So you stop an instant and sorcery or an enchantment. Okay. For 1 blue though. But this card still sees more play than regular Counterspell. I feel like a lot of this one is the fact that you can catch people off guard because what's the difference in being tapped out or holding 1 mana up? Your opponent doesn't know what's in your hand. For 1 mana, they're probably thinking that you're running Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile. Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But most people don't see a Swan Song coming. For some reason, it's one of those counterspells that a lot of people don't see coming. Granted, yes, they get a 2/2 flying bird, but in Commander we have 40 life. Are you worried about them flying you for 2 with a bird? That's going to take them 20 turns just with the bird. Now, granted, yes, they're going to have other cards on the field. But, again, it's another thing that makes you wonder, is this card actually worth playing over Counterspell, or should the person playing Swan Song really just go ahead and put it in Counterspell instead? But, speaking of giving your opponent's value at the same time, Arcane Denial is another card that I see played more often than Counterspell. It's 1 generic and a blue. Counter target spell. Its controller may draw up to 2 cards at the beginning of your next turn of the next turn's upkeep. You draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Now, granted, I've seen somebody actually use Arcane Denial to counter their own card so they could draw 3. I've seen people do that, but I've also seen a lot of the time somebody just uses Arcane Denial to counter their opponent's thing. Now, for the fact that it's 1 generic and a blue, it's a little bit easier to cast and Counterspell, which makes it a little more understandable. But is it worth giving your opponent the draw 2 cards, potentially? or most people planning to use this to simply draw 3. Again, it's a card that can also give additional value because of the fact that you can draw a card, and it's a counterspell that replaces itself. Now, if you counter your opponent's card, unfortunately, you're letting them draw 2 on the next turn. Unless they decide not to draw the 2, because it says may draw up to 2, but I don't know why they would not draw the 2, unless there's a bunch of effects on the field saying, like, every time you draw a card, like Smothering Tithe or Psychosis Crawler, something like that. Well, no, Psychosis Crawler doesn't work. Again, a lot of things that make you question, why do people play this instead of just playing regular Counterspell, but yet it sees more play. Alright, so the last card that I want to talk about, this one is probably the most obvious. Yes, it's better than Counterspell, and yes, it's on the pricey side. Why would I not bring up this card talking about other Counterspell variations when I brought up Force of Will? As one of the other most expensive counterspells in the game, Mana Drain. 2 blue for an instant. Counter target spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add an amount of colorless mana to your mana pool equal to that spell's converted mana cost. So this is Spell Swindle. Except it's a Spell Swindle that doesn't give you artifacts. There's no tokens involved. It just, on your next main phase, you just add colorless mana to your mana pool. Is that better than regular Counterspell? It does the same thing, and it's giving you mana. Absolutely. This card absolutely 100% outclasses Counterspell. Now, the other cards, there was a lot of hit or miss, a lot of, well, this card's more expensive, this card has a way to free cast it, this card only counters these specific kind of cards. So, in the end, what is the deciding factor on having counters in your deck? How do you go about deciding what counterspells you use? Now, how many counterspells do you run in a deck? If you're running a mono blue deck that runs 20 counterspells, sure, I'm pretty positive that you're running Counterspell as one of the cards. I wouldn't see a reason why not if you're running 20 of them. But when it comes to, let's say you're making a 4-color deck, and let's say you only run between 3 to 6 counterspells. Which counterspells are you running? Do you run regular counterspell in that instance, or do you run one of the other variations? Are you picking counterspells for value, or do you want counterspells to just hard stop on your opponents? It's one of those questions that I'm very curious to see what other people have to say. How do other people approach this? How do you go about picking counterspells for your deck? Do you play with counterspells at all? I fully understand that there are play groups that just don't like counterspells at all. They absolutely throw them to the wayside. They don't like them. They don't play with them. They don't allow it in their play group. I understand that. Our play group, we do play counterspells. We usually play at least 3 or 4 counterspells in a deck if we're running counterspells at all. But again, this question goes out to you guys. Be sure to leave a comment down below and let me know what you guys think. How do you go about picking counterspells? Do you run them at all? How many do you run? Do you run counterspell, or do you prefer the other variations because they look cooler, they're more expensive, or the fact that they do other things? But until then, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you like the video, be sure to share it with some friends and everybody. Hit that thumbs up button. And be sure to check out patreon.com/topcommander. I'll have that right here on the screen. And check out the different tier levels if you wish to support this channel directly. But until next time, be sure to take it easy, and I'll see you guys next video.